Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And welcome back. As we mentioned prior to the commercial break, our first discussion this morning is with the Prime Minister of Belize as well as the Program Director for the Nature Conservation in Belize as well. And we're discussing this morning the shift to the blue bonds. Before that, however, and I want to welcome you guys both. Thanks for joining us here in studio to have this conversation with us. Before that, however, PM, I would like to get from you perhaps a brief recall or a summary of your attendance at the initial days of COP26 and of course the World Leaders Meeting. What was the experience like for you this time around as the Prime Minister, which is a totally different capacity perhaps from your previous attendance, and your representation of this country there?
Well, first of all, thanks very much to you, Isani and Paul. But before we start off, I need to start on a kind of somber note that my heart goes out to Marlene and her family on the loss of her mother, and kind of remember hearing that her mother was sick by COVID, and we were quite hopeful that she was going to recover. But it gives us a reminder around us that COVID is for real, and I wish that we can get more and more people vaccinated, because more people vaccinated we have, the less chances there is of a spread, so that then the vulnerable people that are already vaccinated are better protected. So I want to start after Marlene and to our entire family, that our heart goes out to them, our sympathies, our love to them, that we are with them during this very, very tough period. But saying that, Isani, I have attended several COP meetings when I was Minister of Environment. But now that I went as the Prime Minister, obviously it's a totally different ball game. Quite exciting to be among your colleagues, some of the big boys and girls, in the league, in the world. But once you're in there, you realize that you're one among equals. We all represent our own countries, and that Belize is in a position where we can boast, and that we can. Trying to find the right word, where we can throw at them, I would say throw shade at them. We are doing our part, and the blue bond is a part of what, that we'll discuss a little bit more later. In conservation efforts, Belize is among the best in the world. I mean, we have about almost 30% of the land under protected status, over 60% under forest cover. With the agreement that we've signed with TNC, by 2026, we are going to have about 30% of our waters under some sort of protection. And the developed countries have not done that. What they have done, they have destroyed their environment to be able to develop themselves. But that development is now having a direct impact in countries like developing countries like ours. And my frustration, and when I lashed out, in effect, it was not planned. When the lady asked me the question, was that to point out our frustration and saying, here we are doing our part, but you big guys are not doing your part. And now you're talking about adaptation. I rather mitigation and not adaptation, because adaptation means that you have to adapt to the new changes. But that said, then give us the money to be able to do these necessary changes.
I believe that that comment that you made elicited a response from Boris Johnson, correct?
Yes, it did. And Boris Johnson had to admit that he could understand and agree. With what they said. When you look at Miami was swamp, and then get rid of all of the mangroves and get rid of all of the marine life, and then full up and pretty and air conditioned and everything. And now we can't do that. Not that we want to do that, but the point is now for us to be able to protect you, Miami, your lifestyle, we have to keep our mangroves. We have to have more forests to be able to help to reduce the temperature in the world. But then, how about our people? We also want to have a good life. And to us, that is, as the people in Monkey River, that Monkey River is pretty much washing away.
That's
a direct impact of climate change. Climate change is here, and we are living it.
Let me ask you this, and perhaps I can also phrase the same question to Julia as well. Do you guys believe that it's somewhat of a double standard? That some of the very countries whose economies have been built on, for instance, fossil fuel, and then you have another country, a developing country such as Guyana, for instance, that is now realizing all these reserves that it has and perhaps already has a plan of how to further develop its country and its people by way of exploiting these oil reserves, being told, let's move away from fossil fuel and move to clean energy. But these are the very same countries who have built their success on fossil fuel. Do you guys believe that perhaps it's somewhat of a double standard?
Well, certainly it's a double standard, but and it is something that has to be addressed, and that is what then is upsetting, that they would throw trillions of dollars in going at coal and going at oil that are emitters, and create temperatures to rise. But yet, one fight we have to be able to get $100 billion, which is nowhere enough. Now we're saying we're not going to get that $100 billion until about 2023 or thereafter. And we have to find a way so that we avoid the double counting, and double accounting, so that then they give you $1, but then they count it at $2 or $3 or $4. That all of these things that we have to do. And Guyana is right; they have to express a certain amount of frustration. Now that they have one of the largest reserves in the world, now the developed countries want to tell them, but hold on, you can't develop it because of the effects it's going to have on the planet.
I just coming out of Glasgow, I wanted to ask about the Glasgow Deforestation Pledge, where leaders committed to completely end deforestation by 2030. And let's not make any mistakes. Belize is not free of charges when it comes to deforestation. Gold mining, we see illegal logging, we see illicit activities from persons, illegal immigrants coming in from across the border. What are areas in reaching this goal of ending deforestation by 2030 do you see more investments needs to be made here in Belize, and how does your administration fight the interests of these huge corporations that seek to abuse our forests?
Well, as it is, we have about 60% of the country is under forest cover. Doesn't mean that we have to be able to cut down. I'm not saying that, just to point out. But there are two things that has to be done. One is a reforestation program, and secondly is more in the policing to ensure that there's not encroachment where they should not be encroaching, that it should not be. If you notice on the Hummingbird Highway for a few years now, you see people are going more higher and up on the mountain side. These things start to have erosions and other problems. It's enforcing the laws, ensuring that we don't have encroachment, ensuring that we don't have illegal logging, etc., etc. And this is where funding can come in to help us, because we have limited resources. Now, if we can have access to the funding, and this is what the Blue Bond, the conservation fund that we're setting up through the Blue Bond, will be able to help us more on the marine, but using the $100 billion that they're talking, that if we can have access to these monies, then we could do a lot more in protecting what we have, and then doing a more aggressive reforestation program. When I was the Minister of Natural Resources, remember we had the issue with the bark beetle. And we invested and we planted, I think it's over 10 million pine trees. And right now, if you go into the Mountain Pine Forest Reserve, you will see all of these trees have grown beautifully over the past 14 years or so. So that's what we have to do, both approaches.
Let's
If I
get to-
could,
yeah,
but
go
if I
ahead.
could add a little bit to that, Paul, because in addition, I think one of the greatest drivers for deforestation in Belize right now is agriculture.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the things that actually we will be partnering with the government on to help to do it in a more sustainable way, right? To do it in a way where your soils remain healthy. You can do agroforestry where you can plant and maintain your forest cover as well. So there are also ways in which you can develop the economy, continue to, improve our food security without having the devastating impacts of clear-cut industrial type agriculture. So nowadays there's a lot more tools, there's a lot more information, and these are some things that we want to work to help to invest and apply in the country.
Let's look at that in the context of cattle ranching, for instance, where huge swaths of land is cleared to have cattle, cows and stuff be able to graze and forage and what have you. How do you look at that in the context of economy and agriculture, but at the same time it has an effect on the environment?
I love that you use that example of cattle. You can look at places like in Mexico and Guatemala, right in our neighboring countries. There are different techniques that are being used called silvopastoral, where they don't cut down the forest. The cattle are actually roaming through the forest. They have a healthier diet. They are actually producing more because they're healthier, and they're not having the impact on the environment as you would if you cut the forest. So it's just a different way of doing things. I think we as Belizeans, we tend to, we have this mindset that when you go in, you're going to do, you're going to clear for corn or you're going to clear for cattle. It's just the way that it's always been done. What we need to do is to educate and train and let people know that there are better ways to do things where you're going to increase productivity, reduce costs, and have a lower impact on the environment.
I fully subscribe to what Julia has been saying, that we need to look at ways of doing things differently, doing it smarter, not harder. And for instance, and using the example of cattle, it's a matter of, again, one, that you don't have to clear cut everything. You need to leave, as it is right now, we're in discussion with the Minister of, both Minister Land Habit and Minister Mai, about ensuring that whenever you're going to do agriculture, that a certain percentage of your land is left intact to protect it, one. But secondly, with cattle, you don't need this, what they say, an acre per one head of cattle, because then you could also grow your own grass. So you need less land. Once you can grow your own grass or grow your own corn to be able to feed them, so they do not need larger spaces. You don't have to be able to land clearing. The technology is there. It's just a matter now of us passing on that technology to our farmers. And one last thing before we move on, it's important to point out that the greatest threat to the environment in countries like Belize is poverty. That is why you have so much illegal logging, because of poverty. People say, I cut one tree, I could get only $100 for that, or whatever the going price it is. We have to address the issue of poverty, and that means by creating jobs and opportunities for our people. And that goes down to the economy. So it's all interlocked or intertwined, that one action has an effect on something else. So we have to be very careful as to how we plan the way forward.
Let's segue now to the Blue Bond. I guess this is where we attempt to break down the complexity of this particular initiative and to share with our viewers what the benefits of it will be to the Belizean public. PM, begin by sharing with us government's move under your administration to see this through.
Well, certainly, Isani, I think this is a win for the people of Belize. And I know within the political circles, people say, well, we get it done, or which is the truth. Or the UDP say, oh, well, we started out. The point, what to me was more important, that we made a win for the people of Belize. Here, where the Superbond was worth about $560 million, and we paid them off thanks to the efforts of TNC, and we're very appreciative for what they have done by paying them off at 45 cents on the dollar. That saved approximately $500 million, Belize. I mean, that's $500 million that we'd have had to use taxpayers' money to be able to pay. That allows us to be able to have more money, to be able to put in education, to put in health, to put in agriculture, and all that needs to be done. So in simple terms, it means that we have less money to pay. But just as important, probably even more importantly, to me what's more exciting is that paying this off now, we set up a new, what we call now the blue bonds, worth about $360 million. And maybe have $1 million or two here, approximately $360 million US, for which we are setting up a conservation fund. It's about 20 plus million US.
The endowment is
$23.5 million.
Yeah.
And so that whilst we eventually would be paying off the blue bonds, we'll also be setting up a conservation fund. We're going to be having monies available for mostly marine conservation at this time. Presently, the government is only spending about maybe $2 million a year, and that's nowhere enough to be able to patrol, for instance, or waters. When people are out there doing illegal fishing and shrimp and conchs and everything else, just raping the sea. And so by doing this now, government, a portion of that money is government will be able to access it through for the Fisheries Department or Coastal Zone Management or Coastal Zone Management Authority. It's something that has been there for so long, but has not been able to really do its job properly because of lack of funding. And then we'll be able to have also monies available for the NGO community, for fisher folks. And I want to bring this home, that the areas that we're going to be setting up for as conservation areas, it is not going to be areas between the reef and the mainland, so where our fisher folks do most of their work. It's something exciting, it's something new, it's something that the rest of the world is looking at. I mean, this is the largest, by far, the largest marine or conservation buyout that has been done. The beauty about it is that we have debt forgiveness. A lot of small countries like Belize, we were at about 130% of debt to GDP. So we get debt forgiveness and at the same time setting up monies for conservation. So it's a win-win for us as Belize and for Mother Earth, for everyone.
Let's get Julie's perspective from the Nature Conservancy. How critical has it been to be a part of this initiative and to see it through to success?
Isani, this has been actually an incredible experience to be able to work on this, develop this with the government, and to bring it to fruition. I'd like to just maybe try and break this down a little bit more. Sure. The PM did a great job in, so I want to take it a little bit further, because on one hand, there's the debt restructuring for the Superbond. So that is one agreement, and within that, what we were able to do is, like the PM said, immediate debt reduction of $500 million Belize dollars. But then, in addition to that, we have longer repayment period and reduced debt service payments. So the added benefits are even actually much higher. So that's just the financial side. Then there's the conservation, what we call the conservation financing agreement, which is a conservation fund. So that is a 20-year agreement whereby we have this endowment that government is putting in $23.5 million US dollars as a seed, so to capitalize that endowment. That endowment is going to grow After 20 years, we anticipate it'll be somewhere in excess of 90 million US. So over 180 million US will be available for conservation in perpetuity. At the same time, there are payments that will be made from the savings from the Superbond, which is now the Blue Bond, and those savings, which will amount on average over 8 million Belize per year, will go into this conservation fund. And that will carry on for the 20-year period. At that point in time, the loan is done. The Blue Bonds, all of that is completed. Then the endowment kicks in. And that is what provides the funds in perpetuity, because all they're doing is removing the interest off of that endowment. So this is for TNC, this is the second one of these that we've done. The first one we did in the Seychelles back in 2016. But this is the very first one that we're doing under our Blue Bonds for Marine Conservation Program, which we launched in 2019. It is, as the PM said, the largest debt restructure for marine conservation that has ever happened in the world. So Belize continues to be a global leader. We're on the global stage. I think this goes back to some of your earlier comments, PM, at COP. It gives us as a country a platform to say, look what we are doing. What are the other countries doing? And I can tell you, there has been such a flurry, and everything from investors and banks wanting to be a part of this. And so I see that us as Belize and the Nature Conservancy together, we're really, we're trailblazing, we're leading the way to global change.
What's important about this, if one more thing to add, is that but what we're doing now, once we set up this conservation fund, it is, we have a fund that now can attract more money.
Yeah.
Good money attract more money, and since this is good money, now you have, since this is looking mostly at marine conservation, but then also if the Jeff or any other group or association or business or company wants to make a donation for conservation, the Chicky Bull, for instance, that I know FDC, Friends for Development and Conservation, that they're working on right now, if they can get funding and they need, instead of everybody setting up their own little funds, they can put that money in that fund, and then the monies that they put in there is going to be earmarked specifically for that work. So to me, that is what is exciting about it, that once we set this up and it is managed properly, because it's going to be managed by TNC and ourselves, and the NGO community is going to be something open and transparent so that everybody can see, it will be able to attract more funds for conservation efforts in Belize.
Behind the numbers, one of the main purposes here is marine conservation. What Belizeans also seek to know, apart from the numbers, is how does this affect me? How does this benefit me? How does this benefit my country? We know that also that there are several, but before I get there, let me ask that question in terms of what are the end goals when it comes to marine conservation, and how does this directly impact the lives of Belizeans, especially those who depend on the ocean for a livelihood?
Thanks for that question, Paul. I've been listening to the news. I've been hearing a lot of discussions about the various conservation commitments. And yes, that is a part of this deal as well. So as the PM mentioned, the first one is really to have all of our oceans, this goes out to the EEZ, 30% of that under protected status, right? Half of that would be what we call high biodiversity protection, or no take. The other half would be multiple use, right? So you can still do fishing and can still do other things there. Right now, we as a country, we are at almost 16% protection. Now, I want to clarify this right now because there's a lot of numbers circulating. The reason why the numbers that you'll hear different numbers because we're looking at all of our oceans to the EEZ. A lot of numbers that have been reported previously only go out to our territorial waters. In terms of how this is going to benefit, the way in which we're going to do this is going to be through a marine spatial planning process. Now, when I talk about MSP, that's what I'm talking about, Marine Spatial Plan. So the MSP process is one that will be stakeholder driven. It'll be led by the government. It will be facilitated by TNC and others. Will help to build the capacity to go through this process. This is not something that will happen overnight. This is a 5-year process. The MSP, it's a participatory process. It is where you bring in all the different users, all the various sectors, fishing, tourism, just coastal communities, recreation. But it's not only about present users, but you also need to look at the future. What are potential future uses? Could there be uses in energy? Could there be, could we have wind farms? We don't know. Navigation, all of these things. So you bring in all these, all these sectors together, and they are the ones that drive where the areas should be assigned for protection. It is a way of just taking your marine space and putting in zones and say, this is where you're allowed to fish, this is where you're allowed to do deep sea fishing, or here you can do recreation, here is for tourism, to avoid conflicts between the users. But the users are going to be the ones to drive that. So in terms of what the benefits are, it's really, we're talking about planning for our oceans, current use, future use, but in order to reduce impacts. So that's one of the things. And the end goal is really to have a marine space that helps to build our economy, but also provides protection, because as you know, that reef is really what protects us against storm damage. When you have hurricanes coming in, and you can compare areas where, for example, mangroves have been clear cut, and areas where the mangroves are still intact, and you can see the difference in the damage. So all of these are things that need to be taken into consideration. And that's, that is really going to drive sort of guide how do we develop our marine and coastal seascape.
So let me quickly add something when she was talking about that. It reminded me with the conservation areas that we have on land. A lot of that was not properly thought out. You just declare this area because for whatever reason, X reason. But when I was, again, a minister back then, we started to realize that there are certain areas that we have put on conservation that should be agricultural land. But other areas that we're giving out for agricultural land should be for conservation. So we, through the efforts of the Protected Areas Conservation Trust, the PAC, we got funding to be able to revisit the entire plan that we had, the Protected Areas plan. Unfortunately, well, then I left, so I don't know what really happened with that project, which was very important to be able to redefine we did it at Marine Pines Park,
Pines Creek National Park.
National Park. I'm trying to remember, yes. Working with Will and Tide, where we kind of shift to open up certain areas. So what Julie is talking is very important, but how it will affect Belizeans up front? Well, there are certain ways. Differently, certainly is that there's less money that we have to find to be able to pay these loans. Then that means that as a government, we have more money to be able to do the things that we promise in Plan Belize. The issues of free education, the national health insurance. As it is right now, for the first 5 years, we're going to save about $50 million US. That's $100 million now the government is going to have available that we'll have to pay out to be able to use to do some of these things. And I know people like to say, well, how it affect me now, my pocket? Well, then your child will go free to school. Or you have a national health insurance program that your children, your family can have access to basic healthcare services. This is how we'll be able to help, that we'll be able to work with Minister Garcia in making more monies available to help families in need, the food program, and so many other things that we have. The counselors so much need. And $100 million can go a long way when you have these needs.
How would we be able to gauge accountability for the expenditure? Because we've seen what happened with the Petro-Caribe funds when monies were made available at a national level that ought to have been used to develop the people and the country of Belize?
Well, they're slightly different in a sense. In this sense, it's not that we are getting $50 million US
know.
or $100 million. It's just it's $100 million less that we have to pay.
Yeah.
The difference with Petrocaribe is that you are being given money, so you to be able to spend or to do things that will help the country. As Julius, Minister Espat pointed, Julius Espat, and I agree fully with him, and we need to start to work on that. Is to really do an audit on Petrocaribe and see where these monies were spent and on how it was spent. I think we need to, the Belizean people need to know. But in this case, we are going to be paying out less for loans. That will then allow us to have more money to be able to do with the portions of Plan Belize. For instance, I'll give you a simple example. The UDP government spent over $100 million in housing whilst they were about $8 million per year. We, in our first year, we are aiming, we're going to be building about 150 homes. Ask the UDP government to show us 150 homes that they built in 13 years after they spent almost $100 million in housing. That is the kind of things that we have to be able to look. We have to ensure, we said that there are three things that we wanted to do, that we have to do immediately when we get into government, is to be able to have control over COVID, to grow the economy, and to fight crime. I think we've done very well in the first two, and the third one is a much more complex one, but one that requires not just the Minister of Police, but it requires the Minister of Human Development, Dolores Garcia, the Ministry of Youth with Kevin, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Finance. It has to be a complete whole government approach towards fighting crime, because fighting crime is not just criminals, but also poverty and the problems that we face. But that can be a discussion for another day.
Going back briefly to the consultative process for development that you spoke about, is there a timeline in terms of this consultation process? And while consultations are ongoing, are there any organizations on the ground already working in these areas that you've identified and you're able to invest in while you consult towards an end goal?
So two things I want to mention there. First of all, yes, it will be within the next year, we're going to start the marine spatial planning process. I anticipate it'll be sooner. We wanted to give the government enough time, though, to make sure that they're able to build a capacity and prepare. So that's why we said, okay, within a year, we're going to start the MSP process, that consultation process. However, next week, we start a stakeholder engagement process, another consultation process for the development of the conservation fund. So this independent fund that is going to receive, on average, over $8 million per year for distribution, still has to be set up. But that's going to be set up with the guidance of the stakeholders. We've gone through, we have identified all the various stakeholders across the country, everything from, government, non-government, private sector, village council, everybody. And we're going to start this process next week. We're going to start sharing some more information about what it is, how we're going to develop it. And that's going to last about 6 months before we're able to actually establish that entity, that conservation fund. Once that conservation fund is established, it'll be independent, have its own board, have its own staff, and they'll be the ones to issue the funds back to various government departments to implement the work under the MSP, as well as through a grants program, provide funds to conservation NGOs, to fishing cooperatives, coastal communities, private sector, to help so it's not just about conservation, but it's also about livelihoods. So that's so there's going to be two processes, one to establish the conservation fund, and then the other, which is the longer MSP process.
The exciting thing about this is that here now, talking about the transparency and accountability, is that now government, when they be making their payments to the blue bonds, a portion of that money will be going down into the conservation fund. And that conservation fund is not going to be controlled by the government. It's going to be managed by a group of different groups of people, organizations, and with what is going to be clearly spelled out on what is going to be spent. And from that, then a portion will be used then where then the fisheries department can access funding. It's not a matter where the fisheries department just get a check.
Yeah.
Is that they say, well, this is what we're going to do, these are what are going to be our targets and our goals, and then they get funding towards it. And the same thing, like I use the Coastal Zone Management Authority as an example, and anything that has to do with marine. And then the rest of the monies then will be accessed by the other NGO communities and cooperatives, as what Julie has mentioned. It's quite exciting what we're doing. Complicated, but we're trying to make it as simple as possible so people can understand how is it that they're going to benefit.
What's the terms of repayment on the blue bond?
It's going to be 20 years. For the first 9 years, 19 actually.
It's for the blue loan, it's
Yes,
19, and the conservation is 20.
20. And the 19 years, the first 10 years is going to be interest, and then the last 10 years interest and payment and the principal.
These are running simultaneously, or?
Yes.
Yes, simultaneous.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, there's the deal songs to many too good to be true. And there's always this question or this criticism.
It's not too good to be true. It's not enough. We need more.
Well, there tend to be this criticism when it comes in terms of ulterior motives. What does the creditor get from this? What does TNC benefit from this in terms of?
But one of the things that, Paul,
seeing-
let me start out by saying something and answering that this was not done alone just by us sitting down, negotiating with TNC and also the bondholders. It is something that required the assistance of everyone. In government, remember, we had to cut salaries by 10%, and our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, our public officers, all of them helped us to be able to accomplish this. Because by doing this, then we could have gone to the bondholder and said, we can't pay you. We just cut salaries. We just cut government, the monies for government by about 20%. And so we can then negotiate in earnest with them. Or else you would have never agreed for a 45% cut, or 45 cents on the dollar cut. So it is something that everybody participated to make this available.
Let me ask
But
you.
actually,
sorry, go
but
ahead.
I do want to, one of the things that Paul said, so it's too good to be true. And I think you were kind of getting to like, what's in this for TNC? Is that what, yeah. I thought you were.
Well, I was going to go there.
I figured that's where you're going. One of the things so TNC, this is TNC Belize. We have been working in this country for over 30 years. In fact, next month we celebrate 30 years when we first opened our office, right? Yes, we are a part of an international organization but we are Belizean. So everything that we are doing is just as much for us as it is for the organization, right? But more importantly, what it's doing, we are a philanthropic organization, so we get our funds from fundraising and from donors. What this does is that it frees up funds to go back into conservation without having to fundraise for it. You are reducing the debt, and the savings from that debt of a sovereign nation, in this case Belize, is going into conservation. Imagine if we as TNC then had to go and raise this, 200 million or 85 million, whatever it is. We don't have to raise that now. That's going into conservation. So it is achieving our mission while it is providing benefits for the country. How can you not love it, right?
We can't. It's a win-win because, as I said, as a government, our debt to GDP will go down by about 12%. We're saving $500 million. Yet, when we're paying, we're setting aside monies for conservation, which will end up to about $200 million.
Let me ask you this, PM. As the Minister of Finance, how challenging was it to be able to approach the bondholders once again after perhaps having previous meetings with them where they sort of frowned on government's proposal to refinance the Superbond? Now you put together a team, you sit with the Nature Conservancy, and you come up with a proposal that you had to pitch to them. The threshold was set at 75%. How difficult or challenging was that to be able to sell the idea of this particular restructuring, if I may?
It was very difficult, but as I said, for us to be able to do that, we had to do the hard choices here. Remember when we met with the IMF and we said we have our own homegrown plan,
Yeah.
and the IMF said, okay, we're going to take one. We don't think you can do it, but we're going to look back and see what you're doing. It is only after they saw us meeting with the unions, doing the consultations for months to get them on board to understand what we're trying to do, that they agreed to the 10% and then at the same time working with the private sector, with agriculture, with tourism, the BPOs, to see how we can get the economy, jumpstart the economy. The IMF said at best we're going to have 3% growth. But when they saw what we're doing and seeing that, for instance, on our second quarter, we had growth of 22.3% growth. This quarter, it seems we're going to have about 10%. So by the end of this year, as opposed to 3%, it seems that we might have 7% growth to GDP. Then they're saying, okay, I think we see what you're doing, and we kind of agree with what you're doing. And then that allowed us then in earnest to negotiate to the bondholders. Because earlier the bondholders said, well, we know the talk. Unless you...
That's what I was alluding
Unless
to.
you get a stamp of approval that from the IMF that you raise taxes and you cut salaries and they fire people, we're not going to talk. But once they saw what we're doing and the IMF was that, and that TNC was a serious partner, then they started to talk slowly and then realized that, okay. And of course they pushed to get more, and we said, this is it. And I mean, we started off offering 30 cents. And in our mind, we said we wanted to reach at 50 cents. And if you, kind of a little bit complicated, but if you take away the deferred payments that the Barrow administration did to the end and the interest payments that we did not pay on first, we actually got 51 cents on the dollar as opposed to the 55 cents. So we had to do the tough choices and to show that we know what we're doing before we could have gotten the bondholders to negotiate. These are seasoned business people. I mean, they would go at you if they have to cut your throat to be able to get the last dollar. They're going to do it. But then, when we pointed out to them, it's not only about debt forgiveness, but look at what you are going to do. You're going to help us to be able to do some conservation work in the country, something that's totally new in the country. You are going to be a part of history, in effect, and that kind of helped, because then after they said, well, TNC will get all of the glory, and what are we going to get? That's what some of the bondholders were saying. But we managed to convince them that it's not only cutting the debt, but also doing something good for the country.
Of a political nature, not in a partisan way, but let me ask you a question of a political nature. I look at the tenure of our leaders of government, and perhaps one could say that over the past 4 or 5 terms, there have been monumental achievements under each particular prime minister. I look at, for instance, under the previous administration, we had the movement to go to the ICJ. Under your administration,
but the ICJ was run by the PUP. Everything was done there. It was pretty much.
I'm not so much talking about the
but just needed to correct you that was the job, the work of the PUP government.
Fair enough. It's the same way that the UDP would say that this one is their work as well. But I'm not looking at it.
That's another matter.
At it from that perspective. You'll forgive me. I'm simply saying, look.
They turned that down 3 times, this thing. But anyway.
All I'm saying is that under each government,
yes,
there is a monumental achievement for Belize, right? So we're going to the ICJ. That's one. This one, we're fixing the Superbond, so to speak. But it's the beginning of your legacy as the Prime Minister of this country. This is perhaps the first landmark achievement that you would have overseen in your term in office. But it's just the beginning of the journey, in a manner of speaking. What else is there for you guys to be able to tackle in terms of matters of national interest?
Poverty, crime, the economy, COVID, all things that we do working on every single day. And we're starting to see some benefits. As I said earlier, the issue of crime is going to be a long-term one because it
So is
includes
poverty and education.
I'm sorry?
So is the issue of poverty and the issue of education.
Of course, and that is why we already are saying that we want to start off with free education in the south side, because that is where an area of crisis, so we want to be able to do that. We just agreed in cabinet that we're going to double up the food program, because again, people are still not working to the point where we are. But we are having for the first time in the history of Belize an investment summit, where we have businesses that have shown some kind of interest in investing in Belize that has passed $600 million, and that has never been done. We have a different approach to things. The former Prime Minister was a gifted orator and a gifted lawyer, but that clouded his vision of getting things done. Come from the private sector, where you have to set goals and where you have to make sure that I know what it is to pay a mortgage. I know what it is to pay a loan for your business, and if you can't do that, no disrespect to lawyers, all they need are a laptop or an office and then good to go. I have invested millions of dollars in this country, and I know what it is that you have to pay, and I bring with that same mentality into government. How is it that we're going to get to point B? What are the things that have to be done? And having a simplistic approach is much better than trying to talk fancy words and confusing people.
The end of this week marks a milestone for administration.
We're not the end, it's the 11th. When is it?
That's
Yes.
Thursday or Friday.
Yes,
one
Thursday.
one year in office. One would argue that your administration haven't been able to realize those goals as it relates to security at this time in terms of tackling crime. More so, one of the things you spoke about in your campaign was trust and renewing trust within the the system, the judiciary and crime fighting system. What we've been seeing play out over the past few days in the news has to do with allegations that high persons within the ranks and file of the police department are involved in crimes, particularly the landing of drug planes or narco trafficking. Initial reactions, initial thoughts to hearing
two
these
things
news?
I need to point out. We never said that we're going to accomplish everything in 1 year. It takes time. And look at what we've done so far. Look at COVID. Look at the vaccinations. More than 50% of Belizeans have gotten, I think by now, their first dose. We have enough vaccines for everybody that wants a vaccine right now. The UDP government only made arrangements for 100,000 doses, which is only for 50,000 people. And then even pay for it. We had to pay for it. And we have done an aggressive testing for COVID to try to contain it. Now that we had the Delta variant, the previous government had to deal with Delta. We deal with Delta, and that spreads like crazy. And so we've been doing everything possible to do that. Look at the economy. We've been opening up the economy. I have visited Guatemala, I visited Mexico, speaking with heads of state to be able to open up markets. Our Minister of Agriculture has been to El Salvador to be able to see how we could open markets. Agriculture has been growing faster than it has ever done in the last 13 plus years. The BPO, so we've been doing something on agriculture, on the economy. And then when you look at the issue of crime, never in the history of Belize have a government made such a bust that happened over the weekend, where high-ranking people seem to be implicated, and that the commissioner and the minister of police have said, we are going to go after them, or we are going to bring in every help we can get to be able to arrest these people. Today, several of them are going to be charged, something that has not happened before. So now, trust, you can't win trust overnight. If you have a problem with your brother or your wife or your sister, you tell them you're sorry, and they will forgive you, but they will still be looking at you suspiciously. It will take time, and that is what will happening with us. We have to be able to win back that trust that was destroyed by the previous government.
Do you think or believe that there's complicity in the ranks of the department in terms of constant allegations of officers being involved in illicit activity?
Well, from what we're seeing right now, and I don't have the information, and even if I had the information, I don't think I'll be able to speak to it at this at the moment. That it was always worrisome, and we kind of used to joke about it previously when we were in opposition, that the police go north when the plane lands south, and vice versa. And you say, well, what up? Now that this happened, now you kind of wonder, maybe there was something there when we were joking. Maybe there was something there that within the ranks of the police. And this is something, gentlemen and Julie, you don't believe me, and I've said it to many people privately, this is what sometimes gives me sleepless nights, that the narco trade, they have so much money that they could just come over and just buy over everybody, and who no one pay, they could do things. I wish God forbid that it never happens in Belize. Look at what happened to a country like Mexico, where the narcos have pretty much taken over large areas of their country, and as much as the federal government has been fighting and tens of thousands of people have lost their lives, billions of dollars have been spent, they still have not succeeded. What about us small Belize? We need to root it out now before it just take us over. So I'm pleased that something like this happened, that we managed to do a bust, and that it implicates, it seems that the people that are involved in it, and that it seems that even within the police department, that can give us an opportunity to be able to root out these bad cops. You realize that we have fired, I think, or released, I think it's about 30 or 40 cops already in the first year.
40 according to
40 of them too, yes. So we are trying to do as best as we possibly can. As soon as we find out that there's a cop that's not operating the way it should, we're trying to weed them out.
It's a difficult challenge.
It's a difficult challenge. I mean, and I'm not going to fool anyone that it's going to be done overnight.
Is there any request from your administration to have some identified persons take a hands-off approach on the investigation of this case? Or
Sorry, is what?
Is there any request from your administration for certain persons of influence to take a hands-off approach?
Well, I have been out of the country, so I just got in yesterday evening, and I'll be meeting with the minister and the commissioner. But what I can assure you is that we will do everything possible to get to the people behind this.
All right, so are there any parting words that you guys would want to share before we conclude our conversation?
Just that I feel that we, and when I say we, the collective we, government, TNC, everybody that's worked on this deal, and even those that haven't worked on it, I think we should feel really proud of what we've accomplished. This is going to be transformative for our country. It is going to have a ripple effect across the world. So I think now is the time for us to really just, be proud and applaud ourselves for what we have accomplished as a country.
Well, Julie, I think it's going to have a tsunami effect, not a ripple effect, because now everybody's looking at what we have done and how it was accomplished. So I think it is, rightly said, transformative. And certainly as a government and as a leader of this government, I'm very proud to be a part of it. And of course, we could say, we did it all on our own, and we had a phenomenal debt management team that worked on it. I mean, people like Mark Espat's, Ambassador Mark Espat and his team, and also in the US, they had a group of people, all of them working on this. They did a wonderful job. But to me, the true heroes of all of this and getting this done is the public sector, our government employees, or as I said, our teachers and doctors and BDF, and even the police and the public officers, because by them willing to take that cut, that 10% cut, and then and with their work to be able to cut government finances by about 20%. We managed to be able to convince the bondholders that we're serious about what we're doing. And so I think they are the true heroes. They are the ones that really helped us to be able to cross over that bump or that hill to be able to get this done. And certainly I can't end by not thanking the TNC. I mean, what they have done is phenomenal. And the work that they have been doing is priceless. And they have people that are really, really dedicated. And I'm proud to say that Julie, a Belizean, here working with us in accomplishing this. So, and I thank the Belizean people for having that faith in us. And hopefully, and with time, slowly winning back that trust that people should have on their governments. Once again,
Thanks for joining us this morning for this extended conversation. I think
should have been 20 minutes.
it has proven to be rather enlightening, not only for myself and my co-host, but for those watching as well. Thanks again and good morning.
Thank you.
Another commercial break at this point, and when we return, we are going to be joined by our colleague in Glasgow, Scotland. Dwayne Moody is going to give us a update on what has transpired over the past week and what we can look forward to as we continue with COP26.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.